Welcome back. This is day 7 of evolution. And believe it or not, this is actually your last day of evolution notes. So next week, we're going to be working on some labs. But this is the last notes video you guys are going to have to watch for evolution. So that means your test will be coming up pretty quickly, just something to think about. But today, your aim is going to be, what is speciation and what is its relation to evolution? Now, we know this word, right? We know that evolution means change over time. But speciation looks like a new word. Now, I noticed that it kind of looks like the word species, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, I want you guys to pause this video and answer your do now question. So explain why comparing the vein patterns of several leaves is a less reliable means of determining the evolutionary relationships between two plants than using gel electrophoresis. So right now, pause this video and tell me what you know. And press play when you're ready to review it. So when we're talking about comparing the vein patterns of several leaves, we're talking about looking at structural evidence or even phenotypic evidence, right? We're looking at those physical structures that the organisms have. But yesterday we actually talked about some organisms that look pretty similar on the outside. Like we talked about the fins or the flippers of dolphins and sharks and even penguins. They all look like they're pretty similar, but are they the same underneath? No, right? We actually found using DNA evidence that they're not related at all. They have some similar structures on the outside, but if you look on the inside and look at their DNA, they're not related. They don't share a common ancestor. Now, you might notice that I have said the word DNA a few times. So now let's look at this example of gel electrophoresis. What does gel electrophoresis do? Well, it compares DNA fragments based on size. Now, if we're looking at the DNA of an organism, what type of evidence is that going to be? Well, that's going to be an example of genetic, or you could have even said molecular evidence. Now, generally, when we're looking at types of evidence to support evolution, genetic or molecular evidence is always our go-to because the DNA doesn't lie. Sometimes the structures or the phenotypic evidence can kind of trick us, when in reality, they're not that related. So when in doubt, we're always going to look at the DNA because that is where we really start to see those evolutionary relationships where we can see, oh, these organisms have similar amino acid sequences, or oh, these organisms have a similar DNA sequence. So genetic or molecular evidence is always more reliable than structural evidence because we're able to look at those specific DNA sequences and really figure out which organisms are closely related. All right, so now what is speciation? Hypothesize. Right now I want you guys to go ahead and pause this video again and answer questions 1 and 2. What is the definition of a species? Be as specific as possible. And then what factors allow for organisms to become distinct species or different species? So for instance, look at these birds. What do we notice? All right, go ahead and pause this video, hypothesize, write down a guess for number 1 and 2, and press play when you're ready to review it. All right, number 1, what is the definition of a species, right? Well, we know that dogs and cats are different species, right? Giraffes and elephants are different species. So what exactly is a species? We're going to consider this a group of similar organisms that can interbreed, and here's the most important part, produce fertile offspring. When we see this word fertile, that means that their offspring can also reproduce, right? So these organisms are producing offspring that can later produce more offspring. But now, number 2, what factors actually allow for organisms to become different species? So look at these birds. We've got parrots, we've got hummingbirds, we've got lovebirds. What do we notice about them? Well, they've got different colors, they've got different beak sizes, they've got different wing sizes. There's a lot of differences, right? And you might also say they live in different environments. Now, I'm not actually going to tell you the answer to this because we're going to figure it out in just a few minutes, but notice that I said the word environment. That might be pretty important. But now I actually have another video that I want you guys to watch. This video is a whopping like 2.5 minutes. I promise you, you can handle it. But this video is quickly showing you how speciation in an anole population or a lizard population came about over time. And as you watch this video about these lizards, I want you to think about, how does one species split and multiply into many? All right, so pause this, click on the other video on your worksheet, and then come back to me when you're ready to go over it. Right now, again, if you have not watched this lizard video, it is literally 2 minutes long. Please watch it. It'll explain a lot, right? But if you have watched that video and are coming back to go over it, welcome back. So how does one species split and multiply into many? Well, we saw that with these lizards, they were geographically separated, right? They maybe migrated into different areas and went into different environments. And over time, those species actually, or those populations, evolved separately as they adapted to their individual environments. And we saw that those dew flaps, these little things right here, actually became different amongst those populations. So when those populations came back together, they didn't even recognize each other. They were like, what are you? And they can't breed. So this is known as reproductive isolation. Again, this is when populations of the same species become isolated or separated from one another. So one example of that is through geographic isolation. And evolve separately, right? They've got different environments. So this means that if they ever meet again, they will have become so different that they can no longer reproduce. And this is how we get different species, right? When they can no longer reproduce together. I just realized you can't really see that red against the purple, but I'm hoping you guys can read it. It says separated different environments. Okay. All right, so I've got an example or another example of this for you. So imagine with me, several thousands of years ago, a flock of migrating hawks, like this guy right here, was driven from their normal route by a severe storm. So this is their normal migratory route, but due to that storm, they actually got thrown off course. And because of that, the birds ended up on 2 different islands as shown on the map. So some of our birds ended up on island A, and some of our birds ended up on island B. I guess I should do that in the same color. See, the environment of island A right here is mostly rocks and cliffs, like their original nesting ground. So these hawks over here are pretty comfortable. It's what they're used to. But the environment of island B is a lot different from what these birds are used to. It's actually a dense forest. Here comes another one. But thankfully, these hawks were able to survive, probably due to the genetic diversity that they had, right? And the hawks that survived on these islands to present day with no migration between the 2 populations. So these populations cannot intermingle. That space between the islands is too great. They're not flying back and forth. So when put back together, if these hawks ever meet again, they can no longer breed. Why? I want you guys to explain how this example demonstrates speciation using the terms barrier, isolation, and environment. See if you can figure this out. Well, you could have said anything along these lines. So due to the severe storm, hawks migrated to 2 different islands, right? Some of them went to island A, some of them went to island B. And the ocean acted as that geographic barrier, keeping those hawks isolated or separate from one another. Since the environment on island B is so different from the mainland and island A, eventually hawks on island B will change due to natural selection. And only fit traits for that environment, right? Remember, what do we call those fit traits for the environment that help them survive and reproduce? Adaptations. Right? So only fit traits for that environment or adaptations will be selected for. Over time, this population of hawks will evolve into a completely different species and will be unable to interbreed. So again, if these hawks from island A and island B ever meet again, they're not going to recognize each other. And it's not just a matter of like, oh, I think I met you a few years ago, but like, I kind of forgot your name. It's like, they literally look at each other and they're like, what are you? Like, you're not one of me. You're not one of us. You don't belong here. They don't recognize each other at all. They're completely different species at that point, and so they can't reproduce and can't produce fertile offspring. So that is how speciation occurs, where one species gets separated and they become 2 entirely different species due to those different environments. Now, oh, there were supposed to be some animations here, but they're all gone. So we're just gonna do this all at once. So what exactly is speciation? So this is the formation of new and distinct or different species. As populations of species evolved, members of each... That seems unnecessary. Let's try that one more time. As populations of species evolve, members of each species can become reproductively isolated or separated. So again, when we see that word reproductive isolation, this is when members of two populations can no longer interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Those two populations don't recognize each other as of the same species, right? They cannot mate. Now, there are actually a few different types of reproductive isolation that we need to know. And the first one we've mentioned is geographic isolation. So this is when populations become separated by geographic barriers, like rivers, mountains, or bodies of water. So we can see here that a mountain region has formed in between these two different types of flowers. I don't know about you, but I don't think a pollinator is going to want to cross that mountain region. So these types of flowers are going to evolve separately into two entirely different species, right? We've also got ecological isolation, when species live in the same area but occupy different habitats and rarely encounter each other. So here we've got a species of lizard living in a tree. We've got another species of lizard living on the ground. These guys probably aren't going to come in contact with each other. And because of that, they're not going to be reproducing. And we've also got temporal isolation, which is dealing with time. Specifically, hold on, when species reproduce in different times of the day or in different seasons. So here we've got a species of flower that's alive during the winter, species of flower that's alive during the summer. Because these flowers are most likely reproducing at different seasons, they're not going to interact with each other. They're going to become entirely different species. All right. So we've mentioned these Galapagos Islands and the finches that are part of them a few times by now. So I want you to tell me, what type of reproductive isolation do you think this is an example of? Well, we're looking at the Galapagos Islands, right? We've said that each of these islands have a different environment, and there's a large body of water in between each one of those islands. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this is an example of geographic isolation, right? Each of these islands are completely separated by bodies of water. So these birds are not interacting with each other. They're not going to cross that ocean to go say hey. And if they do, they're not going to recognize each other because they are entirely different species at this point. You can see that they've evolved differently, right? These birds, because they are so different, cannot reproduce with each other, right? They are entirely different species of finch. And that is all I've got for you guys today. So go ahead and turn in complete your exit ticket, turn in these notes, and have a wonderful day. I will see you guys tomorrow.